Byzantine Christendom, building on the Roman past. The contraction of the Christian faith in Christian societies in Asia and Africa left Europe and Anatolia largely by default as the centers of Christendom. The initial expansion of Islam and the Arab Empire had quickly stripped away what had been the Middle Eastern and North African provinces of the Roman Empire and had brought Spain under Muslim control. But after the Mediterranean frontier between the Islamic and Christian world stabilized somewhat in the early 8th century, the immediate threat of Muslim incursions into the heartland of Christendom lifted, although border conflicts persisted. It was within this space of relative security, unavailable to most African and Asian Christian communities, that the diverging histories of the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe took shape. Unlike most empires, Byzantium has no clear starting point. Its own leaders, as well as its neighbors and enemies, viewed it as simply a continuation of the Roman Empire. Some historians date its beginning to 330 CE, when the Roman Emperor Constantine, who began to favor Christianity during his reign, established a new capital, Constantinople, on the site of an ancient Greek city called Byzantium. At the end of that century, the Roman Empire was formally divided into Eastern and Western halves, thus launching a division of Christendom that has lasted into the 21st century. Although the Western Roman Empire collapsed during the 5th century, the eastern half persisted for another 1,000 years. Housing the ancient civilizations of Egypt, Greece, Syria, and Anatolia, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, was far wealthier, more urbanized, and more cosmopolitan than its Western counterpart. It possessed a much more defensible capital in the heavily walled city of Constantinople, and it had a shorter frontier to guard. Byzantium also enjoyed access to the Black Sea and command of the Eastern Mediterranean. With a stronger army, navy, and merchant marine, as well as clever diplomacy, its leaders were able to deflect the Germanic and Hun invaders who had overwhelmed the Western Roman Empire. Much that was late Rome, its roads, taxation system, military structures, centralized administration, imperial court, laws, Christian church, persisted in the East for many centuries. Like Tang Dynasty China seeking to restore the glory of the Han era, Byzantium consciously sought to preserve the legacy of classical Greco-Roman civilization. Constantinople was to be a new Rome, and people referred to themselves as Romans. Fearing contamination by barbarian customs, emperors forbade the residents of Constantinople from wearing boots, trousers, clothing made from animal skins, and long hairstyles, all of which were associated with Germanic peoples, and insisted instead on Roman-style robes and sandals. But much changed as well over the centuries, marking the Byzantine Empire as the home of a distinctive civilization. The Byzantine state. Perhaps the most obvious change was one of scale, as the Byzantine Empire never approximated the size of its Roman predecessor. The Western Roman Empire was permanently lost to Byzantium, despite Emperor Justinian's impressive but short-lived attempt to reconquer the Mediterranean basin. The rapid Arab Islamic expansion in the 7th century resulted in the loss of Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa. Nonetheless, until roughly 1200, a more compact Byzantine Empire remained a major force in the Eastern Mediterranean, controlling Greece, much of the Balkans, which is southeastern Europe, and Anatolia. A reformed administrative system gave appointed generals civil authority in the empire's provinces and allowed them to raise armies from the landowning peasants of the region. From that territorial base, the empire's naval and merchant vessels were active in both the Mediterranean and Black Seas. In its heyday, the Byzantine state was an impressive creation. Political authority remained tightly centralized in Constantinople, where the emperor claimed to govern all creation as God's worldly representative, styling himself the peer of the apostles and the sole ruler of the world. The imperial court tried to imitate the awesome grandeur of what it thought was God's heavenly court, but in fact it resembled ancient Persian imperial splendor. Aristocrats trained in Greek rhetoric and literature occupied high positions in the administration, participating in court ceremonies that maintained their elite status. Parades of these silk-clad officials added splendor to the imperial court, which also included mechanical lions that roared, birds that sang, and an immense throne that quickly elevated the emperor high above his presumably awestruck visitors. Nonetheless, the centralized state touched only lightly on the lives of most people, as it focused primarily on collecting taxes, maintaining order, and suppressing revolts. Personal freedoms in the provinces was constrained more by neighbors and rival households concluded one historian, than by the imperial government. After 1085, Byzantine territory shrank, owing to incursions by aggressive Western European powers, by Catholic crusaders, and by Turkish Muslim invaders. The end came in 1453, when the Turkic Ottoman Empire, then known as the Sword of Islam, finally took Constantinople. One eyewitness to the event wrote a moving lament to his fallen city. And the entire city was to be seen in the tents of the Turkish camp, the city deserted, lying lifeless, naked, soundless, without either form or beauty. O city, head of all cities, center of the four corners of the world, pride of the Romans, civilizer of the barbarians, where is your beauty, O paradise? Where are the bodies of the apostles of my Lord? Where are the relics of the saints, those of the martyrs? Where are the remains of Constantine the Great and the other emperors? Oh, what a loss. The Byzantine Church and Christian divergence. Intimately tied to the state was the Church, a relationship that became known as Kaiseropapism. Unlike in Western Europe, where the Roman Catholic Church maintained some degree of independence from political authorities, in Byzantium, the emperor assumed something of the role of both Caesar as head of state and the Pope as head of the Church. Thus, he appointed the patriarch or leader of the Orthodox Church, sometimes made decisions about doctrine, called church councils into session, and generally treated the church as a government department. The empire and the church have a great unity and community, declared a 12th century patriarch. Indeed, they cannot be separated. A dense network of bishops and priests brought the message of the church to every corner of the empire, while numerous monasteries accommodated holy men whose piety, self-denial, and good works made them highly influential among both elite and ordinary people. Eastern Orthodox Christianity had a pervasive influence on every aspect of Byzantine life. It legitimated the supreme and absolute authority of the emperor, for he was a God-anointed ruler, a reflection of the glory of God on earth. It also provided a cultural identity for the empire's subjects. Even more than being Roman, they were Orthodox, or right-thinking, Christians, for whom the empire and the church were equally essential to achieving eternal salvation. Constantinople was filled with churches and the relics of numerous saints, and the churches were filled with icons, religious paintings, some of them artistic masterpieces, of Jesus, Mary, and numerous saints that many believed conveyed divine presence to the faithful. Complex theological issues about the Trinity, and especially about the relationship of God and Jesus, engaged the attention of ordinary people. One 4th century bishop complained, "I wish to know the price of bread. One answers, the Father is greater than the Son. I inquire whether my bath is ready. One answers, the Son has been made out of nothing." Partisans of competing chariot racing teams, known as the Greens and the Blues, vigorously debated theological issues, as well as the merits of their favorite drivers. In its early centuries and beyond, the Christian movement was rent by theological controversy and political division. Followers of Arius, an Egyptian priest, held that Jesus had been created by God the Father, rather than living eternally with him. Nestorius, the 5th century bishop of Constantinople, argued that Mary had given birth only to the human Jesus, who then became the temple of God. This view, defined as heretical in the Western Christian world, predominated in a separate Persian church, which spread its views to India, China, and Arabia. But the most lasting and deepest division within the Christian world occurred as Eastern Orthodoxy came to define itself against an emerging Latin Christianity centered on Papal Rome. Both had derived, of course, from the growth of Christianity in the Roman Empire, and therefore had much in common: the teachings of Jesus, the Bible, the sacraments, a church hierarchy of patriarchs, bishops and priests, a missionary impulse, and intolerance toward other religions. Despite these shared features, any sense of a single widespread Christian community was increasingly replaced by an awareness of difference, competition, and outright hostility that even a common fear of Islam could not overcome. In part, this growing religious divergence reflected the political separation and rivalry between the Byzantine Empire and the emerging kingdoms of Western Europe. As the growth of Islam in the 7th century submerged earlier centers of Christianity in the Middle East and North Africa, Constantinople and Rome alone remained as alternative hubs of the church. But they were now in different states that competed with each other for territory and for the right to claim the legacy of imperial Rome. Beyond such political differences were those of language and culture. Although Latin remained the language of the Church and of elite communication in the West, it was abandoned in the Byzantine Empire in favor of Greek, which remained the basis for Byzantine education. More than in the West, Byzantine thinkers sought to formulate Christian doctrine in terms of Greek philosophical concepts. Differences in theology and church practice likewise widened the gulf between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, despite agreement on fundamental doctrines. Disagreements about the nature of the Trinity, the source of the Holy Spirit, original sin, and the relative importance of faith and reason gave rise to much controversy. So too, for a time, did the Byzantine efforts to prohibit the use of icons, popular paintings of saints and biblical scenes, usually painted on small wooden panels. Other, more modest differences also occasioned mutual misunderstanding and disdain. Priests in the West shaved, and after 1050 or so, were supposed to remain celibate, while those in Byzantium allowed their beards to grow long and were permitted to marry. Orthodox ritual called for using bread leavened with yeast in the communion, but Catholics use unleavened bread. Far more significant was the question of authority. Eastern Orthodox leaders sharply rejected the growing claims of Roman popes to be the sole and final authority for all Christians everywhere. This rift in the world of Christendom grew gradually from the 7th century on, punctuated by various efforts to bridge the mounting divide between the Western and Eastern branches of the Church. A sign of this continuing deterioration occurred in 1054 when representatives of both churches mutually excommunicated each other, declaring in effect that those in the opposite tradition were not true Christians. The Crusades, launched in 1095 by the Catholic Pope against the forces of Islam, made things worse. Western crusaders passing through the Byzantine Empire on their way to the Middle East engaged in frequent conflict with local people and thus deepened the distrust between them. From the Western point of view, Orthodox practices were blasphemous, even heretical. One Western observer of the Second Crusade noted that the Greeks were judged not to be Christians, and the Franks considered killing them a matter of no importance. During the Fourth Crusade in 1204, Western forces seized and looted Constantinople and ruled Byzantium for the next half-century. Their brutality only confirmed Byzantine views of their Roman Catholic despoilers as nothing more than barbarians. According to one Byzantine account, they sacked the sacred places and trampled on divine things. They tore children from their mothers, and they defiled virgins in the holy chapels, fearing neither God's anger nor man's vengeance. After this, the rupture in the world of Christendom proved irreparable. Byzantium and the world. Beyond its tense relationship with Western Europe, the Byzantine Empire, located astride Europe and Asia, also interacted extensively with its other neighbors. On a political and military level, Byzantium continued the long-term Roman struggle with the Persian Empire. That persisting conflict weakened both of them and was one factor in the remarkable success of Arab armies as they marched out of Arabia in the 7th century. Although Persia quickly became part of the Islamic world, Byzantium held out, even as it lost considerable territory to the Arabs. A Byzantine military innovation known as Greek fire, a potent and flammable combination of oil, sulfur, and lime that was launched from bronze tubes, helped hold off the Arabs. It operated something like a flamethrower and subsequently passed into Arab and Chinese arsenals as well. Byzantium's ability to defend its core regions delayed for many centuries the Islamic advance into southeastern Europe, which finally occurred at the hands of the Turkish Ottoman Empire in the 15th and 16th centuries. Economically, the Byzantine Empire was a central player in the long-distance trade of Eurasia, with commercial links to Western Europe, Russia, Central Asia, the Islamic world, and China. Its gold coin, the byzant, was a widely used currency in the Mediterranean basin for more than 500 years, and wearing such coins as pendants was a high-status symbol in the less developed kingdoms of Western Europe. The luxurious products of Byzantine craftspeople, jewelry, gemstones, silver and gold work, linen and woolen textiles, purple dyes, were much in demand. Its silk industry, based on Chinese technology, supplied much of the Mediterranean basin with this precious fabric. The cultural influence of Byzantium was likewise significant. Preserving much of ancient Greek learning, the Byzantine Empire transmitted this classical heritage to the Islamic world, as well as to the Christian West. In both places, it had an immensely stimulating impact among scientists, philosophers, theologians, and other intellectuals. Some saw it as an aid to faith and to an understanding of the world, while others feared it as impious and distracting. Byzantine religious culture also spread widely among Slavic peoples in the Balkans and Russia. As lands to the south and the east were overtaken by Islam, Byzantium looked to the north. By the early 11th century, steady military pressure had brought many of the Balkan Slavic peoples and the Bulgars under Byzantine control. Christianity and literacy accompanied this Byzantine offensive. Already in the 9th century, two Byzantine missionaries, Cyril and Methodius, had developed an alphabet based on Greek letters with which Slavic languages could be written. This Cyrillic script made it possible to translate the Bible and other religious literature into these languages and greatly aided the process of conversion. The conversion of Russia. The most significant expansion of Orthodox Christianity occurred among the Slavic peoples of what is now Ukraine and Western Russia. In this culturally diverse region, which also included Finnic and Baltic peoples as well as Viking traders, a modest state known as Kievan Rus, named after the most prominent city, Kiev, emerged in the 9th century. As in many of the new third wave civilizations, the development of Rus was stimulated by trade, in this case along the Dnieper River, linking Scandinavia and Byzantium. Loosely led by various princes, especially the Prince of Kiev, Rus was a society of slaves and freemen, privileged people and commoners, dominant men and subordinate women. This stratification marked it as a third wave civilization in the making. Religion reflected the region's cultural diversity, with the gods and practices of many peoples much in evidence. Ancestral spirits, household deities, and various gods related to the forces of nature were in evidence, with Perun, the god of thunder, perhaps the most prominent. Small numbers of Christians, Muslims, and Jews were likewise part of the mix. Then, in the late 10th century, 988 to be precise, a decisive turning point occurred. The growing interaction of Rus with the larger world prompted Prince Vladimir of Kiev to affiliate with the Eastern Orthodox faith of the Byzantine Empire. He was searching for a religion that would unify the diverse peoples of his region while linking Rus into wider networks of communication and exchange. As elsewhere in Europe, the coming of Christianity to Rus was a top-down process in which ordinary people followed their rulers into the church. It was also a slow process, and elements of traditional religious sensibility long lingered among those who defined themselves as Christian. Perun continued to speak to some, and magicians sometimes led people astray in the eyes of church authorities. But building churches on the site where idols to Perun and other gods once stood helped to anchor the new faith in its new land. It was a fateful choice with long-term implications for Russian history, for it brought this fledgling civilization firmly into the world of Orthodox Christianity, separating it from both the realm of Islam and the Roman Catholic West. Like many new civilizations, Rus borrowed extensively from its older and more sophisticated neighbor. Among these borrowings were Byzantine architectural styles, the Cyrillic alphabet, the extensive use of icons, a monastic tradition stressing prayer and service, and political ideals of imperial control of the church, all of which became part of a transformed Rus. Orthodoxy also provided a more unified identity for this emerging civilization and religious legitimacy for its rulers. Centuries later, when Byzantium had fallen to the Turks, a few Russian church leaders proclaimed the doctrine of a Third Rome. The original Rome had abandoned the true Orthodox faith for Roman Catholicism, and the Second Rome, Constantinople, had succumbed to Muslim infidels. Moscow was now the Third Rome, the final protector and defender of Orthodox Christianity. Though not widely proclaimed in Russia itself, such a notion reflected the Russification of Eastern Orthodoxy and its growing role as an element of Russian national identity. It was also a reminder of the enduring legacy of 1,000 years of Byzantine history, long after the empire itself had vanished.